The campfire was slowly dying. Raymond Grove was just 12 years old and he should have been asleep. It was late, past midnight on a warm night in 1973. And the party in the car park above Jenny Dixon Beach had long since ended. He and 3 friends had decided to stay, to camp on the sand, to prove they were brave enough to spend a night by the ocean without adults watching over them. They'd built a fire, a proper one, the kind of fire that 12-year-old boys build when they're trying to impress each other. Massive, crackling, throwing sparks into the darkness. Now it had just burned down the coals, glowing red and orange against the black sand. The Tasman Sea whispered against the shore. The national park behind them was a wall of deeper darkness, trees and scrub pressing close to the narrow strip of beach. Raymond was nearly asleep, that strange liminal state when you're not quite sure if your eyes are open or closed. The warmth of the fire on his face, the sound of his friends breathing, the waves crashing beside them, the weight of exhaustion pulling him down. And then something made him look toward the bush. He didn't know what. It wasn't a sound or movement, just a sudden, overwhelming compulsion, the kind of feeling that makes your skin prickle, that tells you in some ancient part of your brain that you're being watched. And as he turned his head, he saw her, standing at the edge of the firelight. A woman, tall, wearing a long dress that reached the ground, flowing and pale, the kind of dress that no one had worn in Raymond's lifetime. The kind of dress from history books from the 1800s, with a high collar and long sleeves. Her hair was dark, pulled back, and her arms were outstretched toward him. Not reaching, pleading. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. Every muscle in his body went rigid, because even in the flickering, uncertain light of dying coals, he knew with absolute certainty that this woman was not from his time. Was not, perhaps, from any time. "Wake up," he whispered, then louder. His friends stirred, groaned. One of them sat up, annoyed. "There's someone..." Raymond couldn't finish the sentence. They'd all seen her. For a moment, no one moved. 4 boys, frozen, staring at a woman who stood impossibly still at the edge of their firelight, her arms held out in that awful pleading gesture. "Help me. Please help me." And then terror took over. One of the boys grabbed a burning stick from the fire. He hurled it at her. Another did the same, flaming wood spinning through the darkness, trailing sparks. But the sticks passed straight through her body. Not around her, not past her. Through her, as if she were made of smoke. They landed in the sand behind her, still burning. The woman didn't flinch, didn't react. She just stood there, her face pale and desperate in the firelight. The boys ran. They scrambled across the beach toward the stairs, 132 wooden steps leading up to the car park, to safety, to the normal world where dead women in old-fashioned dresses didn't appear in the darkness. Their feet pounded on sand, then on wood. Raymond made the mistake of looking back. She was on the staircase behind them. Somehow, impossibly, she'd moved from the beach to the stairs. She stood 10 steps below, her white dress luminous in the moonlight, and her arms were still reaching toward them. Still pleading, still asking for something they could not give. The boys didn't stop running until they were home. Raymond Grove never went back to Jenny Dixon Beach at night. Not for years. Not until he was an adult, driven by a need to understand what he'd seen, to find out who she was, to learn why a woman dressed in clothing from the 1800s had appeared to 4 terrified children on a Central Coast beach and begged for help that never came. That was 50 years ago, but plenty of people swear that she's still there. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and tonight I'm going to tell you a ghost story that's twice as creepy as any ghost tale that we've shared so far here on Struth. And that's because there isn't one ghost haunting Jenny Dixon Beach. There's two. And they're not even the most horrifying thing about this place. One is rooted in genuine maritime tragedy. Shipwrecks from the 1800s that claimed at least 15 lives along a treacherous stretch of coast before Norah Head Lighthouse finally ended the carnage. The witnesses who've seen this apparition describe a woman in period clothing, arms outstretched, searching for something she lost to the sea. The other is a phantom hitchhiker legend so famous it's been covered in films, podcasts, and over 2.5 million TikTok posts. And sitting alongside both of these legends, the maritime ghost and the phantom hitchhiker, lies a real tragedy that should have, but hasn't, haunted the Central Coast for 74 years. Two young girls murdered in 1950, their graves marked only with rocks for 6 decades. An unsolved double homicide that the community seems to have forgotten while embracing ghosts that may never have existed. This is the story of Jenny Dixon Beach, where folklore met real tragedy and created something that continues to draw witnesses, investigators and filmmakers more than 5 decades after Raymond Grove first saw a woman who couldn't possibly be real. Jenny Dixon Beach sits on the Central Coast of New South Wales, about 90 minutes north of Sydney. It's a narrow strip of sand caught between the Tasman Sea and Tuggerah Lake, flanked by Warrabalong National Park near a rocky headland called Norah Head. It's beautiful, popular with swimmers and surfers, the kind of beach that appears on postcards and tourism websites. And it's also haunted by a woman who never existed. Because here's the first twist in this story. There was no person named Jenny Dixon who died at this beach. No murder victim, no drowning victim. No tragic death that would explain the name. The beach is named after a ship. In 1870, or possibly 1871, sources differ slightly, a coal schooner called the Jenny Dixon was caught in a severe storm off the New South Wales coast. The vessel sought shelter in what was then known as Cabbage Tree Harbour, named for the native palms that grew in the area. The captain dropped both anchors. It didn't matter. The seas were violent, relentless, and the ship was swept ashore. All of the crew survived, but the incident was significant enough that locals began calling the beach after the vessel that had run aground there. And over time, through the natural evolution of language and local speech, Jenny Dixon Beach became Jenny Dixon Beach. The name stuck. The original name, Cabbage Tree Harbour, was gradually forgotten. And so, when the ghost stories began, when people started seeing apparitions on this stretch of coast and creating legends to explain them, they assumed the beach had been named for a victim. It's a logical assumption. Ghost stories need origins. Hauntings need causes. If a beach is named Jenny Dixon Beach and a ghost appears there, surely Jenny Dixon must have died there. But as we now know, she never existed. What did exist was death. Real death. Documented death. Because before Norah Head Lighthouse was completed in 1903, this coastline was a graveyard for ships. The reefs off Norah Head are treacherous. Submerged rocks that don't show on the surface until it's too late. Strong currents, unpredictable weather. Captains unfamiliar with the area would run aground. Storms would drive vessels into the coast. Even experienced sailors couldn't always navigate these waters safely. Between 1836 and 1903, at least 36 ships wrecked near Norah Head. The exact number of deaths is unknown, but it's estimated at 15 or even more. Some wrecks were particularly deadly. The Esperanza went down in 1868. The Tim Whiffler capsized in 1871. A Chinese vessel, the name lost to history, deposited even more drowned seamen on the shore. And during World War II, the Dutch-built Nimbin struck a German mine 13 kilometres offshore. The captain and 6 crew died. These weren't maritime disasters happening in distant waters. These were bodies washing ashore, wreckage littering the beach, locals finding corpses among the rocks. For decades, death was woven into the fabric of this place. The lighthouse changed that. Norah Head Lighthouse stands 27.5 metres tall at the southern end of the peninsula. It was completed in 1903 after decades of lobbying following the deadly wrecks, and once it was operational, the carnage stopped. Ships could navigate safely, and the beach stopped claiming lives. But the dead don't always leave. Raymond Grove, who saw the apparition in 1973 and has spent most of his adult life researching it, believes the woman he encountered is connected to these shipwrecks. He believes that she's a mother searching for a son, a child swept overboard during one of the wrecks, a body that was never recovered, a grief that somehow imprinted itself on this place. He's now in his 60s. He lives near Jenny Dixon Beach, and he's adamant about one thing. The ghost he saw is not the same ghost that appears on Wilfred Barrett Drive. Because as I mentioned at the top of the show, there are 2 distinct apparitions at Jenny Dixon Beach, 2 completely different legends, and confusing them has only added layers of mystery to what's already one of Australia's most famous coastal hauntings. The woman Raymond Grove saw wore clothing from the 1800s, a long flowing dress with a high collar and long sleeves, period accurate. She appeared on the beach itself near the scrub line where the sand meets the national park. She followed the boys up those 132 wooden stairs to the car park. She was transparent. Burning wood passed through her body without resistance. 4 separate witnesses saw her that night in 1973. All 4 fled in terror, and all 4 remember it in exactly the same way. That encounter predates the internet, predates widespread knowledge of Jenny Dixon Beach as a haunted location. Raymond Grove didn't have a template to match his experience against. He wasn't primed to seeing a ghost. He and his friends were just camping on a beach, and something appeared that shouldn't exist. What makes his account credible is its specificity. The details about the clothing, the exact location, the physical impossibility of what he witnessed, and the fact that he spent decades trying to understand it, researching shipwrecks, examining historical records, looking for a rational explanation for an irrational experience. He still hasn't found one. But what he has found is this. The beach ghost and the roadside ghost are completely separate phenomena, different time periods, different locations, different descriptions. The second ghost, the phantom hitchhiker, is the one that became famous, the one that shows up in films and podcasts and viral social media posts, the one with an origin story that sounds plausible, tragic, perfect for a ghost tale. And that origin story, according to New South Wales Police, is complete fiction. Wilfred Barrett Drive is the kind of road that feels haunted even before you know the stories. It connects the entrance to Norahville, running parallel to Jenny Dixon Beach but set back from the coast. At night, it's dark, tree-lined, isolated. The kind of road where you can drive for minutes without seeing another car, where your headlights carve a narrow tunnel through darkness and everything beyond that tunnel is unknown. And in this darkness is where the phantom hitchhiker appears. The following is one of hundreds of witness accounts. The doctor was on holiday, a visiting physician from out of state, driving along Wilfred Barrett Drive late one night in the early 1980s. Unfamiliar with the Central Coast and completely unaware of any local legends about ghosts or hitchhikers, he travelled alone along that dark, tree-lined, isolated road, his headlights illuminating the tea tree and saltbush. And then he saw her, a young woman standing by the roadside, long hair, white dress, her arm extended, thumb out in the universal gesture of hitchhiking. Something that in the 1980s was still relatively common in rural Australia. And so the doctor slowed, stopped, wound down the passenger window. She leaned in, her face was pale, her expression distant. She didn't say where she was going, just gestured vaguely down the road, and the doctor unlocked the doors. She opened the back door, not the front passenger seat, always the back, and climbed in. He heard the door close, felt the slight shift in the car's weight, glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her sitting there, staring forward, face blank. He tried to make small talk, asked where she was heading, asked if she lived nearby, asked if she was okay. But her responses were strange, fragmentary. Her voice seemed to trail off mid-sentence, words dissolving into silence before she'd finished speaking. He found himself talking to fill the uncomfortable quiet, glancing repeatedly in the rearview mirror at the pale figure in his back seat. The road curved, the headlight swept across the trees and bushes. He was approaching Norahville Road, near the cemetery. He started to ask again where she wanted to be dropped off. No response. He looked in the rearview mirror, and the back seat was empty. The doctor pulled over. His heart was pounding. He threw the car into park and twisted around to look directly at the back seat, not trusting the mirror, needing to see with his own eyes. Empty, completely empty. He got out, walked around the car, opened the back door. Nothing. No one. The road behind him was dark and deserted. There was nowhere she could have gone. No side roads, no houses, just the cemetery across the way, and empty bushland. But she had been there. He'd seen her get in, heard the door close, watched her in the mirror, felt the weight shift in the car, spoken to her, even if her responses made no sense. She'd been there. And now she wasn't. The doctor drove the rest of the way to his accommodation in a state of shock. He couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't rationalise it. He was a man of science, for Pete's sake, trained to find logical explanations, to trust in observable reality. But there was no logical explanation for what he'd just experienced. The encounter disturbed him so profoundly that when he returned home he sought psychiatric counselling. A doctor seeking help to process what he'd seen, or thought he'd seen, on a dark road on the central coast of New South Wales. He never learned about the legend, never knew that hundreds of people had reported similar encounters on the same stretch of road, never knew that the description he would have given, young woman, white dress, long hair, backseat only, trailing conversation, disappearance near the cemetery, matched reports spanning decades. He simply knew that something impossible had happened to him, and that knowledge, that certainty that he had experienced something that couldn't be explained, haunted him long after he left the Central Coast. And it's this that makes the Phantom Hitchhiker legend compelling to believers. Not the fabricated origin story, not the folklore elements, but the witnesses. Real people, credible people, people like a visiting doctor with no reason to lie, no knowledge of legend to influence his perception, no motivation to fabricate an experience that would require him to seek professional help to process. Something happened on Wilfred Barrett Drive that night, whether it was psychological, environmental, or genuinely paranormal. It was real enough to change that doctor's understanding of what's possible in the world. And he was far from the only one. Hundreds of witnesses have reported seeing her over the past 50 years. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. A young woman, teenager, early 20s, long brown hair, wearing a white dress, sometimes described as a nightgown, sometimes as a formal dress. She stands silently by the roadside, thumbing for a ride. Hitchhiking, which was common in the 70s but rare now. And if you stop, and many drivers have, She climbs into the back seat, never the front, always the back. She'll speak, but her voice trails off. Her conversation is brief, fragmented. She seems distant and distracted. And then, as the car approaches Norah Head Cemetery, she vanishes. The local legend that has sprung up around these sightings is specific and tragic. In the 1970s, the exact year varies depending on who's telling the story. A schoolgirl was raped and murdered by 5 young men. A brutal crime. The attackers got away with it. No arrests were made. No justice served. But the girl's spirit, so the story goes, wasn't willing to accept that. One by one, the 5 attackers began to die under mysterious circumstances. The first hung himself. The second died in a car crash. The third drove his car off a cliff. The fourth picked up the ghost herself while hitchhiking, and after the encounter went mad and was institutionalised. And the fifth and final perpetrator joined a circus to escape his haunting. It didn't work. He eventually shot himself. Supernatural vengeance, cosmic justice, the dead girl ensuring her killers face consequences even when the legal system failed her so miserably. It's a perfect ghost story. It's got everything. Innocent victim, vile perpetrators, supernatural retribution, and a warning. Don't pick up hitchhikers on Wilfred Barrett Drive, because you never know if the woman in white is flesh and blood or something else. As you could imagine, the story spread. It became local law, as much a part of Central Coast identity as the beaches and train stations. It was retold around campfires and at parties. Parents warned teenagers. Drivers claimed sightings. The legend grew. In 2011, filmmaker Christopher Holling made a horror movie about it called Jenny Dixon Beach. Shot partially on location with a meagre budget, the plot follows the disappearance of a schoolgirl named Jasmine Taylor and the mysterious deaths of her suspected attackers. Holling admitted he took poetic license to make the film gorier than the actual legend dictates. The Central Coast Council legitimised the legend through official library events. In 2016, they promoted a talk by Holling about the coast's most famous ghost and how hundreds of credible sightings of her over the past 40 years motivated him to make a thriller about her. By the 2020s, the story had gone viral. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube videos with millions of views. Jenny Dixon Beach became a destination for paranormal enthusiasts and thrill seekers. But there was just one problem. The murder never happened. In February 2024, the Newcastle Herald contacted New South Wales Police about the case. The response was unambiguous. New South Wales Police have confirmed on Thursday that while local officers know the tale, it was little more than a local legend. No victim has ever surfaced, not in 50 years of the legend being told. No specific year exists beyond the vague 1970s references. No contemporaneous newspaper articles document such a crime, and in a small community like the Central Coast in the 1970s, a brutal rape and murder of a schoolgirl would have been front page news for weeks. No family has ever come forward claiming the victim as their daughter, sister, or friend. Archive searches found no such mention of what would have been a sensational crime. And those 5 mysterious deaths of the attackers, the supernatural revenge that forms the backbone of the legend. No documentation, no names, no dates, no obituaries, no police reports, no news coverage. The entire origin story appears to be fiction. But not original fiction, because the Jenny Dixon Beach phantom hitchhiker follows a pattern that folklorists have identified around the world. Jan Harold Brunvand, in his 1981 book The Vanishing Hitchhiker, documented this exact urban legend appearing in multiple countries with local variations. The core elements are always the same. A young woman in white, a lonely road at night. She prefers a back seat, her conversation trails off, she disappears near a cemetery. There's always a connection to a tragic death narrative, usually a car accident or a murder. Paranormal researcher Michael Goss analysed hundreds of vanishing hitchhiker reports globally. His conclusion that they're typically fabricated folklore creations retold in new settings. It's not that the witnesses are lying. Many genuinely believe they've seen something, but psychological factors create the experience. Priming effects. Once you know the legend, you're prepared to interpret ambiguous stimuli as supernatural. A shadow, fog, another pedestrian on a dark road. Your brain, already primed with the story, fills in the gaps. Location characteristics. Wilfred Barrett Drive really is an isolated and eerie place at night. Between 2010 and 2019, 7 people died in traffic accidents on this road. That genuine danger creates anxiety, which makes drivers more susceptible to misidentification and fear-based perception. Confirmation bias. Stories that match the legend are remembered and retold. Mundane explanations are forgotten. If you pick up a hitchhiker who turns out to be a normal person going to a normal destination, that's not memorable. But if anything even slightly odd happens, it becomes evidence of the supernatural. Social reinforcement. Sharing ghost sightings strengthens community bonds. It gives people a shared cultural knowledge, a story that belongs to them. And memory reconstruction. Accounts grow more dramatic with retelling. Details are added, unconsciously, to match the established narrative. What might have been an odd feeling becomes a full apparition. A brief glimpse becomes a sustained encounter. The skeptics would say that the Jenny Dixon Beach phantom hitchhiker isn't evidence of the paranormal. It's evidence of how universal folklore patterns localise themselves, finding new homes in new places, adapting to local geography and history. But here's what makes this case genuinely unsettling. Beneath the fabricated legend, and alongside the shipwreck coast, lies a real tragedy, a real unsolved crime, real victims who have been almost entirely forgotten, while a fictional ghost became famous. On the 29th of August 1950, 2 young sisters told their mother they were going for a walk to Norah Head Lighthouse. Grace Dorothy Holmes, known as Dina by her family, was 18 years old. Her younger sister Kathleen Beryl Holmes, Kathy, was just 11 years old. They'd been in Australia for only 5 months. The Holmes family had fled Dagenham, Essex, after being bombed out 3 times during the Blitz. They'd come to Australia seeking a safer life, a fresh start, somewhere their children could grow up without the constant threat of death falling from the sky. That afternoon, at least 4 Tuggerah residents saw the sisters strolling along the swampland that skirted Tuggerah Lake. At 5:15 p.m, they stopped at the Canton Beach store and bought sweets. They were laughing, happy. 2 sisters enjoying a warm afternoon in their new country. Sometime after that, they were attacked in an area known as the Jungle on the edge of Tuggerah Lakes. They never made it home. Their mother waited, then panicked. By evening she'd raised the alarm. An all-night search began involving 60 residents combing through the scrubland and swampland around Tuggerah Lake. They searched through the darkness with flashlights and lanterns calling the girls' names, but they found nothing. The next morning, 2 searchers, F.M. Brown and F.W. Jackson, spotted something in the mud near the swamp. Footprints. 2 sets of smaller prints, the kind girls would make, and beside them, a man's footprint. They followed the tracks for 3 miles. First they found bloodstains, and then they found the bodies. Grace and Kathleen were lying face down in the swamp, their heads and faces savagely battered almost beyond recognition. Someone had partially covered them with palms and bracken, as if trying to hide what they'd done. The violence was extreme and deliberate. This wasn't an accident or a moment of rage. This was sustained, brutal murder. 2 children killed in the country that was supposed to be their safe haven. A 25-year-old fisherman named William Birdle was arrested after being spotted near the bodies during the search. Police questioned him for 8.5 hours before charging him at 2 a.m. The trial hinged on a single piece of evidence, footprint casts taken from the scene, but the experts couldn't agree. Government medical officer Dr. C.W. England testified that the cast probably matched Birtle's foot. The defence expert, Dr. Vivian Bengefeld, swore under oath that Birtle could not have made the footprint. After deliberating for 80 minutes, the jury acquitted him of Kathleen's murder. A second trial for Grace's murder never produced a conviction. So, the case remains officially unsolved. 74 years later, no one has ever been held accountable for the deaths of Grace Dorothy Holmes and Kathleen Beryl Holmes. And for 64 of those 74 years, the sisters lay in unmarked graves. The Holmes family were too poor for headstones. Two girls who'd survived the Blitz only to be murdered in Australia were buried with nothing to mark where they rested. Just rocks. Anonymous graves that the world forgot. In 2014, a local resident named Gary Ballinger discovered the unmarked graves while researching local history. He was appalled. 2 murdered children forgotten. Their resting place anonymous. He launched a GoFundMe campaign and raised $2,550 from 49 different donors to finally give the sisters a proper memorial. Their brother, Doug Holmes, the last surviving member of the family, 80 years old in 2014, gave permission for the headstone. And only then, more than 6 decades after their deaths, did Grace and Kathleen Holmes finally have their names carved in stone. And here's the terrible irony of the Jenny Dixon Beach haunting. Some researchers believe the phantom hitchhiker legend, the fabricated story of a murdered schoolgirl seeking revenge, may have incorporated elements of the Holmes sisters' case. The parallels are haunting. Young female victims, brutal violence, the same geographical area, Tuggerah Lakes, near what is now Jenny Dixon Beach. Graves at Norah Head Cemetery, the exact location where the phantom hitchhiker supposedly vanishes. Unresolved justice, a community that should remember, but for the longest time, didn't. The legend may have taken real horror, the unsolved murders of 2 innocent girls, and transformed it into something else, something supernatural, something that could be controlled through storytelling, through repeated tellings that gave the narrative a shape and meaning that the actual crime never received. But in that transformation, the real victims were erased. Grace Dorothy Holmes and Kathleen Beryl Holmes are not famous. The case is not covered in viral TikTok videos. Filmmakers don't make horror movies about them. Instead, a fictional murdered schoolgirl from the 1970s, a girl who never existed, became the ghost everyone knows. But things are changing. The Case File True Crime podcast did cover the Holmes sisters' murders in Case 32. I'll add a link to the show notes, bringing genuine attention to the real unsolved crime. But it's a fraction of the coverage the phantom hitchhiker legend has received over the past 50 years. So perhaps the real tragedy at Jenny Dixon Beach isn't a fabricated ghost story. It's 2 sisters who came to Australia seeking safety and found death instead. It's a family too poor to mark their graves. It's 64 years of being forgotten while a fictional ghost became famous. It's the wrong victims being remembered. So the question becomes, why do these phantom sightings continue despite the legend's fabricated foundation? Why do people still report seeing the woman in white on Wilfred Barrett Drive when police have confirmed the murder never happened? The reports are real, even if the origin story isn't. Hundreds of witnesses over 50 years have claimed encounters with something or someone on Wilfred Barrett Drive. Police have filed reports. People have sought counselling after their experiences. Lives have been genuinely affected. And what about Raymond Grove's 1973 encounter on the beach itself? 4 witnesses, a specific location, a physical impossibility of wood passing through an apparition's body, an experience that predated widespread knowledge of any haunting in the location. So what is happening? The simplest explanation in psychology, not fraud, not mass delusion, just the way human perception works under specific conditions. But if the skeptics have got it all wrong, what could it be? Paranormal investigators and believers might point towards residual hauntings. These are traumatic events that somehow record themselves in locations and are replayed under certain conditions, like an environmental imprint that sensitive people can perceive. They'll also discuss intelligent hauntings, conscious spirits that interact with the living with purpose and awareness. The mother, arms outstretched, desperately looking for a son. There's also the genuine history of death in the area. The Holmes murders, decades of maritime tragedy, car crashes. This creates a location where the boundary between the past and present somehow is worn thin. Whether any of these explanations hold truth is also unprovable. But what's certain is that the sightings continue and the legend persists. And two very different ghost stories have become tangled together around the same stretch of coast, intertwined with the very real horror and tragedy of the death of two young girls. And still, on Wilfred Barrett Drive, on dark nights, when fog rolls in from the coast and the headlights carve tunnels through the blackness, drivers still report seeing a young woman in white coming for a ride. To a certain extent, whether the story is real or not almost doesn't matter anymore. The legend has its own life now, its own momentum. It's become part of the place, written into the landscape as surely as the lighthouse and the cemetery and the 132 wooden steps leading up from the beach, where 4 boys once ran in terror from something impossible. Truth. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a huge favour and subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's been really awesome hearing from a number of you over the past couple of weeks on social media and through the email address truthpodcast@gmail.com. Listeners from around the world. I've had a few requests for Aussie mysteries that I'm going to cover in the new year, so thank you to those that have made those requests. Please keep reaching out with your emails. And if you happen to be driving along some dark and lonely road with a group of friends this summer, or indeed for our listeners in the Northern Hemisphere, if you're gathered around a fire somewhere, why not put an episode of Struth on and introduce your mates to the creepy tales that we share here on the podcast? I'd really appreciate it. Keep an eye out up ahead on those desolate roads though. You never know what or who you might see lurking in the bushes. Thanks for listening.